All right, welcome to Songs That Define Us. This is the podcast where we talk to artists, visual artists, musicians, poets, writers, those of us who have been fighting for, who want and understand the need for progress and social change in this country. And it's my belief that there's always been a song when we were little, sometime we heard, maybe it's one our parents listened to, something that struck a chord in us that led us on this path to be empathetic, to understand the world around us at a young age, to understand that progress is a good thing. And a lot of times it is not, taught in our schools. We may not have got it from a teacher, but we get it from different forms of art. And, Songs That Define Us really is, for me, something that I've learned about the climate from the band Testament. I learned about depression from the band Metallica. I learned about sexual assault from the band OTEP. I've learned about Vietnam War from Creedence Clearwater Revival. And it's been something that really, I think, folks out there all sort of have that song that defines them. And today we have musician Jesse Ahern, who we first met when he opened for the Dropkick Murphys, and learned that Jesse was a former IUPAT member. His wife was a former IUPAT member. And Jesse, welcome to the podcast Songs That Define Us.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for having me.
And what's the song that defined you, Jesse?
Well, I'm not sure. You had asked me this question a couple of weeks back, and I was thinking, so many songs have defined me, right? I mean, like, the minute you said we're going to base it off a song and, something that maybe struck a chord with us, so many popped into my head, and I had to sit and think about it for a while. And then I was thinking about The Harder They Come by Jimmy Cliff. And, when I had first heard that song, I was a teenager, and at the time, my world was fairly small. I grew up in Quincy, which is right outside of Boston. It's a 5-minute drive to Boston from where I grew up. And, but it was, Quincy is a city, but it's like a suburban area, and my world was smaller then. And I remember watching The Harder They Come, the movie. That's how I, got hooked on The Harder They Come, the soundtrack and the song itself. And it was the first time I really saw like poverty, and I didn't grow up with much money. My father was a union plumber, and, we weren't very, we didn't have a lot of money. We were not, we're probably lower middle class, I would say. But that was the first time I really recognized poverty and oppression, and that there was a world outside of, just being a kid from the suburbs, I guess. Right. Does that make sense?
It does. And, because it's interesting, right? Because everybody feels like they grew up, because there's always somebody poorer than you, right? You never quite recognize maybe, your own status. And when you see something else, to recognize, that there are folks worse off than you. And there's kind of two paths, right? You sort of have the path of maybe what I would consider, the MAGA path, right? Which is to kind of demean them to make yourself feel better, to maybe try to exploit them to pad your own pocket. Or there's the path to recognize, we should all be able to live a good life. And it sounds like, watching that, hearing that song was one that maybe opened your eyes a bit to understanding, where you are in your own life, but also maybe a role for you to do something to lift somebody else up. Is that accurate?
Well, I recognize that, up until that point, like I said to you, we didn't have much money, and a lot of people I grew up with were definitely had more than we did, or maybe they didn't. I don't know. I just didn't recognize that stuff as much when I was a kid. But I definitely, when I started listening to music like reggae or Jimmy Cliff, or like I said, The Harder They Come was like an example for me that I definitely had privilege. I whether I wanted to admit that, whether I knew that then, I knew that, my life was pretty easy compared to some, and I mean, just everything about that song just always like hit hard with me, like, and even the beginning line, well, they tell me of a pie up in the sky waiting for me when I die, like that promise that you get, that, you'll get yours someday, right? But,
it's the American dream, right? Like if you just work hard, whatever it is, like you're gonna at some point it'll get there, and but we gotta fight for it.
Yeah, but they also, like he says, between the day you're born and when you die, they never seem to even hear you cry. I mean, that's like, the struggles. I mean, I grew up in that era when it was like you pick yourself up by the bootstraps, and you if you work hard, you'll get what you work for, and that's not true. And a lot of us have found that out, and some people will never find that out. They will always think that because of their hard work and yada yada, whatever you want to say, hard work, their work ethic or whatever is what has gotten them where they're gotten, and they don't recognize that some of it's privilege or some of it's generational wealth or some of it's opportunity. And then I always like to say some of it's just luck, right? I mean, I sometimes get a kick out of when people will say to me, well, if you've worked really hard to get where you are in music, but they forget that I've also had a lot of luck, I mean, most of it's been luck. It's been, yes, of course I've worked hard to get where I'm at, but, and that's not much. I mean, I'm not a rich musician by any means, but I'm fulfilled in what I do, and I just know that that's not the case for everybody, and this song kind of taught me a little bit about having empathy and knowing that, it opened up the door to the working class for me. Does that make sense to you?
It does. And if we could touch on something you just said, which is about your career, about being content with where you are, right? And I think that's something in our society, especially now when you look at the social media, when you look at, influencers and this life that so many people seem to be chasing rather than being content with their own status. Like, so people, if they're not happy with yourself, of course you're going to be angry and frustrated. And I do think there's something to good music, good art that, allows you to recognize the good in yourself. And even some of your music, as I listen to it, right, you're singing about working class, you're singing and not in a way that is like putting it down or that you have to be chasing something, but just in a way that like, look, we see you and there ain't nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, we live in an age of consumerism, right? It's like, it's wild. I just want to do my part, as best as I can do. And I don't really think it's much to ask for that everybody do their part, and whether that be me paying my fair share of taxes or a billionaire paying their fair share of taxes. It's just all about doing our part in society and making things better. And it's become less and less than that. It's been like consumerism, the need for more, narcissism, all that stuff is just like really in the forefront right now in society, right? It's like, and they're like, what is wrong with just being, a working class, let's use the word Joe Schmo, or like, what's wrong with just being working class and, what's wrong with not being a millionaire? What's wrong? And then there's nothing wrong with wanting all that stuff either. If that's your thing, that's your thing. But, we don't have to put people down and, crush people to get there. And that's usually, for the most part, people who obtain a lot of wealth. I would say a majority of them, that's what they've had to do to get there, whether it's exploiting the working class, whether it's being a shitty boss, whether it's being just not a great person. I just find that, it's that sort of mentality has really ruined the world. I guess, long story longer,
Yeah, it's you talk about this idea of what's wrong with being working class, and you see it, everywhere, right? You got Starbucks workers and REI workers trying to organize, and then so many people are you're just a barista. Why do you need, like this idea that because of the job has defined the human being, right? Like somebody's paycheck and so many people, they define the person's worth by their wealth. And
yes.
I think we need to start doing the opposite and start defining people. Like, I don't find Jeff Bezos very worthy. He's very wealthy, but he's not very worthy. Like, he's not offering anything to our society. He's not, but yet so many people are doing so much for the communities, for like their worth. They're worth just as much. And I think that's something that, whether it's the Jimmy Cliff song you talked about, and I think that's something that's kind of a through line as we talk to people about the songs that define them. They're songs that really talk about people's worth, not their wealth.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I guess even thinking about when you would ask me what song really defined me, I mean, I think The How Do They Come came to mind more, not because of the song, more because of where it came from, like Jimmy Cliff, in his music, even in his everyday life, if you know anything about him, he's a very positive sort of one love sort of person, right? And when you dig into some of his songs, they're always got some sort of social message in them, right? Like a social justice message in them. At least that's how I take them, and maybe I'm taking them the wrong way. I don't know. That's my interpretation on it. And it's like you said, to bring it back to you're just a barista. Like, why has certain titles defined people of who they are, right? It's like, okay, I'm just in construction. So obviously, to some people, they look at a construction worker as just some stupid oaf, right? Or someone who didn't go to school, or someone, that's how it was looked at when I was a younger person, I think. I don't know if it's so much that way anymore, but I just know that, like you said, people are defined on their wealth or on what they have, the material things. And it's really sad to see everything going that way. And it's, I have this song that I wrote many years ago. It's called "What's Wrong With," and it was like my kind of look at organized labor. Like I've said to you, I'm not in a union right now. I've held a few union books in my time, but I also don't believe that you need to be in a union to know how important the union is, right? Or unions are. You just need to be behind labor. And I've always been pro-labor, my whole life, pro-labor, pro-working class. And in that song I wrote, "You got yours, why can't I have mine?" And that's like my whole thing with, you see these people that they get rich off the backs of others, or maybe they're lucky and maybe they worked really hard and they got rich. I don't know. But they seem to forget that there's other people in the world, right? Why has basic health care, education, minimum wage become problems? Correct? Like, why is this something that we're still trying to solve? It should just be basic needs of people, right?
Yeah, and it's even worse because we're going backwards. It's not even like we're still progressing at a slower rate. Like, we now have, we're electing folks that literally want to decimate public education, which was really the pathway to upward mobility for families like ours, right? That weren't inherently wealthy. And the same people that, want to bring up the revolutionaries as the patriots, as their heroes, want to go back to a system where the wealthy are always wealthy and, the poor are always going to be poor. Because once you have a system where I have this argument all the time with folks about taxing the rich, that it's not just about getting more money and reducing the deficit. Is, when you do that, more money comes back to us because they have a choice. They can either get taxed and give that money to the government, or they could pay higher wages and do things better for the community, because those are the only two options they have with their money. But secondly, it takes away the generational wealth. So it's not these people like Smaug hoarding all the gold for themselves and their families, and then there's nothing left for anybody else. So we can never achieve upward mobility that's why the founding fathers wanted to break away from England, because they wanted to break away from the system of inheritant wealth and ruling class. And we did that for so long, and the same people who constantly want to tout that as their heroes are at the same time trying to go back to a system like that, which is, interesting to me, to say the least. But I don't know if they even recognize necessarily what's going on, because they're so distracted by, what we talked about earlier, which is putting somebody down by looking for somebody worse than them that they could beat up on a little bit to make themselves maybe feel a little better, because they're not somewhere in life they want to be, because they've been chasing something that, rather than just living in the moment and enjoying their family and realizing this is enough.
Well, I mean, look at all the misinformation there is out there now. It's like I myself, I still pedal around on social media. One, because I do have a little bit of a fan base with my music, and it's a nice way to keep up with people, and keep in touch. And two, because I do like to see what I'm up against, and I like to see, like, what is this propaganda that keeps being fed to us that, you too can be a billionaire if you work really hard, because there's no truth in that. And then maybe there is a few people out there that have obtained that, but not in the masses, right? That most people that I know and that will probably never obtain $1 million in their life, right? And nowadays, unfortunately, $1 million is not even that much with the way life is, the way groceries are, putting your kids in college. If all three of my kids went to school, that could be almost $1 million right there, So it's like, it's just our society, like you said, is going backwards, and I don't, unless we have some serious change really quick. I mean, look at what they just did. In the first 6 weeks, they got rid of, I can't think of her name right now. Is it Gwen Wilcox?
Gwen Wilcox, yep, from the NLRB.
Yes. Yeah, they get rid of the head of the NLRB, which is like, that doesn't matter if you're union or non-union or whatever you are. That's just labor, right? You're like, that is someone fighting for you to even have a chance at the table. And that's like, right there is just, that's a clear cut, line. You can see exactly where they're going with everything, So it's like, I don't know who's buying into the other stuff. And like, cause I never want to put anyone down. I've been all around, at this point, I've been all around Europe. I've been all around the country. And before I started traveling, if you had asked me, 10, 12 years ago, if I was going to be talking to two guys from Ohio about, what's going on in the world, I would have said to you, I have nothing in common with them, right? Because that was my point of view at that point of my life. I had not traveled. I had not met people like yourself or all these great people that I've met on the road. But then once I started traveling and connecting the dots, I said, there's people everywhere just like us, right? We're just trying to get by, or we're trying to do better for the people coming up down the line, or just trying to lift people up is all I'm trying to do, right? I'm not trying to tell people they're wrong because they think that way. I'm just trying to tell people, hey, maybe if you thought in a different way, we could come to a better understanding, right?
Yeah. And
I mean, I don't know if, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's on that. And you came, and I want to, thank you. I know I've thanked you before, but when there were some striking machinists, auto mechanics up in Cleveland, out on strike. They were on strike, I think, for about 3 months, and you were coming through on tour. And I asked you if you would come play a little fundraiser, and there wasn't a second question asked about it. But what it is touches a little bit on what you mentioned a little bit ago, what was so refreshing, and I think the way labor should be, which is you never once asked why they were on strike. You never once, try to determine for yourself, is their strike, would you go on strike if they did? It was just, there's workers on strike. What can I do? And that used to be the way things were. And now you have a lot of folks determining for themselves who aren't working there, like, well, what are their issues? Like, it shouldn't matter. You see workers on strike, you don't cross the line, period. But a lot of times now people feel like, oh, I need to find out all the information before I should support that worker.
Well, I mean, that is also the propaganda of the machine, right? It's like, solidarity used to mean a lot, right? I mean, it's like, it's a simple concept. It's like, you're trying to put food on your table, I'm trying to put food on my table. You feel like your boss or the corporation or the company you work for should be treating you better. Like, why is that? Like you said, why is that a problem? Like, why would you question that? And that's the problem with, all the misinformation out there. It's like, it's the same thing where you hear like, oh, well, if you raise the minimum wage, hamburgers would cost $26. It's like, well, I mean, if you raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour right now, it still wouldn't even be enough to get by on, but it would be better, right? And it's proven that is not what happens. It usually lifts communities. It puts money back into a community, right? And it's like, I don't know. You're right. I don't understand why people question picket lines. Like, your motives to question a picket line, to me, really just say you don't give a shit, right? Like, I'm not saying you have to go stand on the picket line with someone. That's not for everybody. But yeah, to cross a picket line, it's like, it disturbs me when a billionaire is trying to manipulate and take over this whole country and cut all this stuff. But yet you still see Amazon trucks, and you don't see UPS trucks dropping off packages. You see Amazon trucks where, why aren't UPS trucks dropping off packages? That's a union company, and they're paid fair for the most part. I mean, obviously they have to fight for what they have, but yet we're still seeing, if I drive down my street right now, I'll see 10 Amazon trucks before I see any UPS, right? So yeah, it really is a mindset of like, well, Amazon or Prime or whatever the hell it is, because I don't use that stuff, that's a convenience. Well, it's also a convenience brought to you by the fucking people who died so people like that could do what they're doing, right? I've never understood this whole thing about turning your back on labor or turning your back on the unions. It's like when union members vote against their better interest. It's so maddening to me that someone would say, okay, well, in early 1900s, the people who started this local, some of them died for this. And I'm just going to throw it all away because I've got some bullshit, thing I stand behind.
Yeah, but because I, whether it's, I think an illegal immigrant's going to come try to take my job, I think, whatever it is, it's like, that's what the labor movement was. That's who they were organizing. That's who they were lifting up. Because when we do that, everybody gets lifted up, right? When we constantly have a race to the bottom, and we want to push people down, then and what's also interesting is when folks want to talk about, get mad at the immigrant coming to work, nobody ever seems to want to, talk about the companies who are exploiting all those people. Like, it's never, as long as they're cheap labor, there's never going to stop bringing in immigrants. As long as there are cheap labor, they're going to keep bringing them in. And this idea that like putting a wall up is going to stop that, while companies and people like Donald Trump who employ them because they want to save money, it's never going to stop. So the best thing we can do is bring them in, embrace them, and give them a good, fair wage. And then, we'll all do better.
Well, I'll tell you a good story from my history. I'm not all the things I talk about, I've had to learn either through having some empathy, maybe from experience, maybe even some of it from a negative experience. So for instance, in 2008, we had this horrible recession, correct? And I was working. I was working in residential construction. And at the time, now as the years have went on, residential construction is being taken over by the unions, which I think is great. It's not strong yet, and I hope it gets there, and maybe it's strong in some places. I know Boston's got a little bit of a foothold in like some of the multi-residential buildings and stuff, but I'm talking about just like everyday residential stuff. So I was working in residential construction. I was doing plumbing, and I was getting angry because at the time there was a big influx of Brazilians working in my area, and a lot of them were still working. And I had found myself almost buying into that bullshit of like immigrants taking my job, right? But because, I try not to take everything on face value, I did a little digging into it. And thank God for my partner. She has been really the guiding light on bringing a lot of this to surface with me, and I realized it was the people who were hiring them that was exploiting them, and that was paying that were paying them at the time probably $9 an hour when they were worth at the time maybe $25 an hour, even more than that. But that would have been nice, and like I can sit here and say to you that I almost bought into that stuff myself, but I just dug a little deeper, and I realized that it's always going to be the boss man that exploits us, right?
Always.
Or it's going to be the misinformed, and there's a good saying that I've often heard in my life: misinformed by the misinformed. And that happens. And like, it's our job to maybe try to say, hey, like when I'm playing in some areas that aren't so friendly to labor, or maybe they're not so friendly to a person that has my point of views. When I was singing Back Against the Wall, which is kind of like a labor song, right? And like, I would have conversations with people after the show that I knew for sure did not feel the same way I did about a lot of issues. But something I said in one of those songs made them go, huh? And maybe I never changed their mind. Maybe I did. I don't know. But it's all about us just trying to keep this message of solidarity, or, unions built the country, labor, working class, and then like, I try not to be that person. I am very pro-union, will always be pro-union, even though I don't work in the union. I've said this many times. I'm pro-labor. I'm pro-working class. Anything that's going to lift the working class is an A+ in my book, So.
Yeah, and it's actually funny you say that, right? Because that's really what this podcast is, right? That song where something struck something in your brain that just clicked. And I think that's what art, whether it's visual, written, a music, a whatever it is, like that's the beauty of art is folks' brain can kind of open up a little bit to something else. And, you mentioned your song Back Against the Wall, and, that's one that, is a great anthem but, there are also songs like, I keep thinking back to like Paul Ryan, who, talked about how he loved Rage Against the Machine, and Tom Morello said, you do realize you're the machine we're raging against, right? Like, it doesn't always necessarily go the way or be interpreted the way that you want it to, but, but it is interesting that like, that's the beauty of music. And and your song "What's Wrong With," right? "What's Wrong With the Picket Line," right? Like it's what's wrong with it,
Yeah, right. Like when I wrote that song, I wasn't saying, hey man, I'm pro-union, don't be a scab, right? I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with being like that, right? But I had to look at it from a different point of view and say, I'm also I do see the downside to some of the politics of unions, right? Like we have the nepotism, we have BAs that spend way and giving someone else a chance. So when I wrote that song, my question was, what's wrong with a picket line? Like, maybe you don't understand it, or maybe you don't believe in it, but what is wrong with it? One of the lines in that really got me was, I'll keep fighting for the things I want, though I know that when you're dead, you can't. I'd rather be a free man in my grave than living as a puppet or a slave. Like, those were foreign words to me at that time, I didn't know anything about that shit. And here's Jimmy Cliff, who was probably a young kid when he wrote that song, that had already lived 10 lives compared to mine, whether it was poverty, whether it was fighting for what he had. So it's like, I don't know where I'm going with this, other than it's like, yeah, what is wrong with organizing, right? What is wrong with, people wanting unions? Like, why is that always been a problem? Like, why are there so many people out there that are anti-union? I don't know. And like I said to you just a second ago, like, I understand people say, oh, well, you're just a number, or there's all sorts of propaganda for that stuff, right? And my only beef, if I ever could sit down and talk to people about this, I would say my only beef is nepotism, right? Nepotism and people holding people holding spots as like BAs or organizers, whatever, too long. They should have a revolving door of that stuff, so that way it keeps it fresh. But other than that, what's wrong with a fucking picket line, right?
And what's wrong with the peace rally? And speaking of peace rallies and social media, I did see on your Facebook that you were out for International Women's Day for a women's parade. I met your son when you brought him to the
that's right,
to the fundraiser, and you had him out on tour. But haven't met your other two kids. But just seeing them out there, seeing you and your partner out there, was incredible. And your song, is it Sons and Daughters, Daughters and Sons?
Daughter and Son,
Daughter and Son is one that, I'm not going to lie. When I first heard it, it was, right around the time of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And, it brought a bit of tear to my eye because, it's, the first time in a long time, I kind of heard somebody really, question masculinity in a way that nowadays has sort of, kind of revolved back to a time of like masculinity is being a bully. Masculinity is trying to put somebody down, not lift somebody up. And that song, when I heard it, really struck a chord to me because, for somebody who, at least I feel like I've been trying to lift up people, my life, whether it's work life or a personal life, to have a song like that recognized that put that out there was really moving to me. And just wondering where that song came from. Was that one that came quickly? Was that one you struggled with? Was that something that you just felt and had to put down? Just curious where that one came from. And it's just a personal side note, just because that song really, really meant and means a lot to me.
No, I appreciate it. I'm glad that it had an impact. I was in Ireland when they overturned Roe versus Wade, and I was, and all the other women in my life, my mother who lived through the 60s and saw the fight for this stuff, or maybe fought herself, and I'm sure she, young woman or any woman in my life, right? And I just was really let down and hurt over that, and I myself couldn't imagine the pain that someone like Kerry, my partner, was going through. Like, to live your life with, a so-called freedom and then have it a basic human right, and then just have it stripped right from you. So I had wrote that first verse pretty quickly, And then I had put it down because I just didn't know, like, I didn't know if it was my place, right? I didn't really have an idea of it being my place to write anything about. And then I happened to go into the studio a few months later, and I was working with a guy named Ted Hutt, who is a really cool guy. And I played him that first verse, or I showed it to him. I don't know how it went down. And he said, you should write more about this. And I wanted to write from like a point of view of being a man, right? Or, you know, not understanding and maybe putting down on paper that maybe it is time to like give that masculinity a rest, right? It's okay to have failings. It's okay to lift women up, you know, and that's just where it came from. And Ted helped me. I mean, Ted's a co-writer in that song. He definitely helped me shape it a little more, you know, and I was really proud of that. That is one of the few songs that when I still play it, I still get worked up. I always do when I'm on stage and I play songs that have a little more of a political tinge or like a message. I get worked up, but that song definitely makes me go, I'm doing the right thing. You know, like sometimes I'll sing a song and go, am I causing trouble right now? Am I or am I really getting my message out there? But when I sing that song, I have no regrets. I have no apologies. This is the song, motherfucker, and you're going to listen to it. Right? So thanks for asking me about that. I haven't really thought about it in a while, you know, about the whole process of why I wrote that song, if that even explained it to you.
Yeah, like I said, just dawned on me, you know, obviously seeing you out there, and then just, you know, again, typically, you know, just all the attacks on those of us who aren't, you know, white males like us that seem to be happening. And you used the term early on, privilege. And I think too many people take that as a negative rather than just recognizing like, it's okay that like certain things came easier to me. Like I have no problem understanding things came easier to me than somebody else. Yeah. Doesn't mean I haven't worked hard. It doesn't mean that I got handed anything. It just means, you know, and I wonder, is it really that there's so many folks who are just not confident enough in themselves, so they, you know, just feel the need to have to constantly validate their status or something, rather than just being like, look, I'm not, you know, with DEI, like I'm not concerned if you decide to interview people of different races and genders and identities and whatever. Like that does, like I'm confident that I if I'm good enough, I'll get the job, and if I'm not, I'm not. Like it's okay.
Well, it's, you know, the whole thing is I think people who do get defensive about it, you know, realize that there's truth to it, because that is usually, I mean, when we get defensive about something, usually it is truth to the reason why we're getting defensive, right? And it's like, hey man, I'm not saying, my brother-in-law is a very successful person, you know, and he comes from two parents that were not born in this country. His mother's from Poland, his father's from Italy. Maybe I'm giving out too much information, who knows? But he worked really hard and he put himself through school. And I understand there's cases like that, right? And I'm never going to diminish that. It's like, I look up to him, I think, you know, but I also think he understands that, and he runs a really great company and he's a good person, and that's for another day. But what I'm saying is, I do think for the most part, yes, if you're a white male, you've been handed an easier route. It's just the way it goes. And that's, I mean, when I was growing up, my parents weren't told they couldn't live in a certain area of Quincy. You know, they weren't redlined. They weren't, you know, they didn't have any civil rights taken from them. They, you know, it's just like, I don't know how people can't look at history and say, you're right. You know, it doesn't mean, like you said, I'm not trying to take away anybody's history. Like, great, you worked hard, you put yourself through school. There are many cases like you, but so did someone else who just lived in a different area. They weren't someone wasn't able to, when I was a kid, there were people that weren't able to go to where I went to school. I just went to public school. I didn't go anywhere great, but there was also public schools, which, were in a different part of the city in Boston that weren't as good. And people didn't get the same education. They didn't get the same resources. And that's all factors in to life, generational wealth. It's like when I was a kid, the most people who were in unions, I'm just going to be fair about it, were Irish and Italian. There wasn't many people of color in unions. You had a few, but there wasn't many. There was definitely no women. There was only a handful of women in the unions. Even when Kerry was in the Glazers union, there wasn't that many people. So I don't get where people are missing that connection of like, and they just feel. I'm not saying that just because of that but there's truth to everything with inequality, basically, whether that women get per man's dollar. What is it,
About
like
80.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, that's
78.
fucked up.
And
and hey,
and black
let's
women get like
face it.
64, Latino women get 58, something like that. So
Yeah,
it's
it's
just
it's and it's like, let's just say it how it is. It's just truth to that, and like, I mean, I grew up with a lot of people who had parents that were from Ireland that came over here, and their grandparents that came over here and were discriminated against, and I understand all that, and no one's ever trying. That's why I think people think you're trying to take that away from them, and I'm not, and a lot of people aren't. They're just trying to bring to light that some people, the minority, has never had the fair shake, right? And that's just truth, and I don't know. I mean, we could go on for days about that stuff, right? And there are some people out there that you could lay down all the proof you had, and they would still tell you that it was bullshit. So hopefully someday that's not the case. Hopefully someday we are more equal as a society, and that's all I hope for.
yeah, I hope for that too. But that's also why we have diversity, equity, inclusion, is because society isn't there, right? So that's why we have laws to put things in place to ensure that folks have an equal shot, because society is society. There's always going to be reasons why this group.
Mm-hmm.
Month is to highlight, right? It's not to diminish, where's Men's History Month? It's like, I don't know, everyone? I don't know. But like,
Yeah, right.
and it's not to diminish the males that do have created, our history, but it's, for so long that, the other history hasn't been talked about.
No, I mean, I mean, all I know is right now we're in 2025 and fascism is on the rise. I mean, over the spectrum of life, right? I have people in my family and in my life that I care about so deeply that are so affected by thinking about how shitty it is for them, right? And I don't know why people don't have this, empathy for the world right now, or like for people. It's like, oh, well, I'm too busy. I'll have fucking apathy, right? Oh, I'm going to scroll and, oh, today so-and-so's free Palestine. Fuck them, right? Instead of maybe saying, hey, why is that not fair for other countries to be being wiped off the map, or people that are just being, made out to be not people, right? You know, whether it's being trans or, you know, just why have we gotten to this place where we want to treat other human beings like that? I don't know. It's fucking frightening to me, you know. hopefully, hopefully we see some change, but right now it's really scary. And thank God for people like yourself and, you know, other people out there fighting the good fight. That's all I could say, you know.
Well, and I would say is thank God for artists like you who ask the questions, right? Like even, you know, what's wrong with, right? Like sometimes taking a step back and, you know, because, you know, even those on the so-called left side of the spectrum, right, they'll do the same thing. They'll point fingers and be angry and not want to have a conversation and, you know, make generalizations and rationalizations, which then, you know, ultimately probably just paints the other side more in their corner, right? So you have these two corners painted in their corner, just, you know, trying to have it out. But like, that's what I find so fascinating about, you know, songs that affect people in a certain way, because there's nothing usually the very best songs, there's nothing very specific about it, right? It's open for, I mean, there's something obviously there, but it's not so blatant that allows, you know, the person listening, right? Like your point about what's wrong with, right? You weren't out there shaming or talking about it. It's just, what's wrong with the piece, right? You tell me, right? Like you tell me what's wrong, and it gets people thinking, like, I don't know what's wrong with it, rather than just putting the people down who are doing it.
Well, that's the thing. You mentioned this great thing about like people on the left. Now, for instance, one of the greatest gifts that I have received from playing music is meeting all walks of life, right? And that goes from, you know, anyone from all the way to the left to anyone all the way to the right, and some people right in the center, right? And like I said to you, if you would ask me 10 years ago if I was going to have friends in Florida, I would have said to you, because I'm from Massachusetts and maybe we're a little uppity sometimes. I don't know. I might have said to you, why would I be friends with a hick from Florida? And you know what? Some of my best friends now that I talk to or that I've met on the road from Florida, right? And I've had this luck of seeing, and maybe, you know, maybe it is easier for me to talk about this stuff, but I think I've always had the internal fight in me, you know, like even when I was a kid and I wasn't traveling, I didn't like the bully. I didn't like, you know, I've never been one that you could really hold down on a job, because luckily, my father was a union member and my uncle was a union member. And luckily, I've held a few union cards in my life that when I've had to work some residential construction, I've never let anyone get anything over on me, you know? And I was always that guy, musician, you know, the same. I couldn't hold down a fucking job. I would have been that guy on the job site that they're like, oh, Jesse's a good guy. He shows up when he does, you know? So it wasn't my path, you know? I mean, some fighting, you know, fighting for people's jobs, but that's not the case. And, but I've also seen enough of it that I've always been able to tell people, like, whenever you, so it's like you need people like me to make it go around as well. You know, it's like I've had this fight with people before about, you know, they say, well, you're not in a union, dude. And I go, but why do I have to be in a union to tell someone that that's a great move? You know, why do I have to be in a union to tell someone that their wage is going to be really good, their whole package, the deal, everything, it's going to be great. They're going to have health care. They're going to have a pension. They're going to have an annuity. And hopefully this piece of orange trash that's in the White House doesn't take that stuff away. And like, to go back to Gwen Wilcox, the courts did side with her going back to work, correct?
Correct. So now the NLRB,
and now is that's a big win, right?
It's a huge win.
From your perspective, your AFL-CIO, right?
Yeah.
And do you know her at all? Have you ever worked with her? Or?
Just have the vindictiveness of somebody like Elon Musk, who went after the Buffalo NLRB specifically because that was the NLRB that sided against him. So it is this retribution in government that, and the thing I like to ask people, I think you've been talking a lot about this, about sort of folks on both sides, and is, all right, would you be okay if Joe Biden brought in George Soros to do an audit? Right? These right wingers would be up in arms, up in arms. But this is not about, it's okay if I think the person agrees with me. This is just not democracy.
Yeah, I know. And it's like, hopefully, I don't know. I mean, right now, I don't have the highest hopes for things, but you always have to hold out for hope, and I'm going down to Washington, D.C. next Saturday. I'm gonna jump on a bus and head down that way. There's a rally going on. They're gonna march to there's a rally going Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm gonna hit the Saturday one. They're marching down the Fox News, the epitaph of right-wing propaganda, lies. We could go on forever. At least I could. And I'm gonna go down. I'm gonna fight the good fight, and I think, for a little while, I'm going to lay low, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to kind of dig my heels in, and I'm going to fight for what I think is right, and I don't know who's going to judge us in the end. You always hear, I want to stand on the right side of history. Well, we'll never know what the right side of history is because we'll be dead long before they decide that, right? But at least for me, I feel like I'm on the right side of history because I'm for the people, right? I'm not for authoritarianism, and I know you are too. And hopefully, we cross paths pretty soon. I'd love to come out that way. Last year when I was on tour, I was talking to a woman out in Ohio about maybe coming out and doing some shows in the penitentiaries for her, but it didn't pull through. But maybe I can come out and do some at some rallies, right?
Well, we'll be glad to have you. We'll, there's plenty going on.
I thought about that, and then I don't know. I don't want to be the Pied Piper of playing. I kind of want to be in the mix, but it is a good idea. I do have my guitar that I've had for a long time that says organized on it, right? I could bring that down, but I think there'll be a place for me to get back on some sort of stage or some sort of, it doesn't have to be a stage, just some sort of platform for me to share my music. I'm going to go back in the studio and re-record a couple of songs next week with one or two new songs that are once again in the ideology of, being for the people, right? Like why is being for the people been known as being a socialist or communism? And before I've just never understood why people like myself who believe in healthcare and believe in basic human rights have been put down. I don't get it, and it is because of propaganda, and that's why I'm going down to the media. It's a media march against, Fox News and whatever else they're going to go to. I think they're going to a few outlets down there, but Fox News is the one that's on the flyer. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think for the time being, that's going to be more of my vibe. I'm going to try to start showing up, and I do plan on showing up to maybe a few state capitals with my guitar and my songs. So hopefully that.
Comes out on your Facebook.
Yeah.
And that's been great. And I did see your organized guitar, which is fantastic. And we actually had a West Virginia union member see that and share his organized guitar. So it started a little.
That's awesome. Contest. I'll have to go. I don't. So I use my personal on Facebook more than I use my band, which I think I'm going to was on Facebook until like maybe a year ago when I was on tour. They said, hey, you should go on Facebook. It's just another platform. And I'm so sick of social media, but I do know it is, I mean, they seem to be, what do you call when you're, what do you call that? Why can't I think about it? I can't think of the word right now. Yeah, censorship. That's right. They seem to be like, censorship with a lot of stuff right now. So I noticed that my feed isn't showing me as much as I used to see, but I don't know what the future holds in store for us. I guess we'll find out. But on that note, maybe I shouldn't bore you guys all day.
No, that's all right. So where can folks find you? I know if you're not going to be on social media. Tesla and got some good comments on it. So, that's every Saturday. So if after the DC trip, if you ever want to come to Columbus, we'll put you in front of the Tesla dealership.
Listen, I love Columbus. It's a great place. It's funny because I've talked to some people that have always asked me, like, I seem to have like a little bit of a following in Ohio. Like I have a lot of friends out there, and they've come to my shows, and I really, really have a soft spot for Ohio. It's a beautiful place, and there's a lot of good people there. I understand that there's a lot of like it's red, right? But I think Ohio might be a perfect example of gerrymandering, right? Am I kind of right there, or
you're not just kind of right? You are.
So basically, how I see it when I've traveled through Ohio is it's probably a lot more blue than it's given, or at least purple, correct? If we're speaking on those terms. And most people I've met have been very, working class or just really cool. And Columbus is definitely one of those places where like I love going through there. I love being there. Cleveland, yeah, Cleveland's cool too, but it doesn't get that same funk Columbus has, It's cool. So
we won't say anything to Cleveland. Well,
no, Cleveland's great. I mean, I love what I like about Cleveland is when you're in the Midwest, because I grew up on the ocean. I'm on the Atlantic Ocean, and like sometimes I'm driving through the Midwest, I miss that. When you hit Cleveland, you see that Great Lake, and you're like, this is nice, So it's. And that's like the gates to the Midwest. I don't know what they actually consider the gates to the Midwest, but that's what I feel like. And then, but Ohio's a great place, and it's on my list. The labor movement out there could use a voice. I'd always come out there. You know that.
I do, and we appreciate you joining us. Everybody, go give Jimmy Cliff a listen to. Give if you haven't, and
media, I just might not be as flooding it with my music stuff, which it'll be sprinkled in there. I'm going to try to use it more for what I think it should be used for at the moment, but if they see me coming around, make sure they hit a show.
Well, I'm going to put a plug in for you to bring you guitar, because I've been to plenty of protests, and it's not just about, self-promotion. Sometimes it's just folks need a little entertainment too, it goes a long way when those things happen. So, I don't feel like you're just doing it for self-promotion. People really do gravitate and want a center at some of these things, and your voice, your music, is something I think that could really bring a center when you're at those places. So, if you come here, we're going to expect you to bring the guitar.
I will. I definitely will.
All right, brother. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. Tell the family we said keep up the fight.
I will. And you guys too. bothering me, you can text me or call me anytime. It doesn't matter to me. I always like hearing from you. So
All right.
it was a good time, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Jesse, from the car. That went well, I think.
You did.